I am saying it loud and clear that it is institutional racism where deportation is concerned.
Facing oppression, division, detention, even deportation.
In life, the things that happen to you, instead of you stressing too much about what happened, you turn it into a song.
Stand up and fight.
I was among the 50 people who was to be deported to Jamaica, painted as a criminal, put in prison. I didn't commit any crime.
In 2012, the British state introduced a set of policies intended to create a hostile environment for immigrants. The policies have been called racist for unfairly targeting Britain's black communities, quick to be thrown out of the country for visa issues or small crimes, despite many being resident for decades. Most shockingly, it led to deportations of British citizens from the Caribbean and even their British-born children, those born subjects of the British Empire, who came to help rebuild Britain after World War II. Many had fought in the war and they were known as the Windrush generation.
Father's name, Oswald Joseph Vitalis, place of birth, St. Lucia, and his occupation, corporal in the Royal Air Force. Dad came here 1962. He was 15 years old. Went into the military when he was 17, 1964. The thing is, that generation came and England was their home. And they brought everyone up thinking that they would have a better life. So they were all the Windrush generation. We always thought we were British. I mean, in my head, yes. But on paper, no.
The government has announced that some members of the Windrush generation are to be refused British citizenship.
Those who arrived from Caribbean countries between 1948 and 1971, thousands of whom were allegedly denied basic rights after being incorrectly identified as illegal immigrants.
These are the people who made modern Britain, aren't they? Their ancestors before them, through slave, tobacco and cotton, contributed to the Industrial Revolution. They came and supported a country that was bleeding and broken after its defeat of Germany, and they worked long, hard, unforgiving hours. I cannot put in words really the toxicity of the hostile environment as it's impacted thousands and thousands of people of that generation. You've lived there for 25, 30 years, and then there's a change in the law that says you're now an illegal immigrant. Or it may be that your parents didn't regularize their status, and although you're born in this country, you don't have English citizenship as a consequence. Sharon Vitalis' father was a serving member of the Royal Air Force. Her brothers and sisters born here are all got British citizenship, and because she's born on a British Army base in Germany, they've denied her citizenship. These are some of the egregious examples that racism in British immigration policy throws up.
I was working and I took a day off to go and pick my daughter up at the airport. When I went, there were 2 officers there and they said they're detaining me. And that was the first time I had deportation paperwork. That's where everything started. I was working as an A&E nurse. They struck me off the register. So took my nursing license away. I mean, that's all I ever did. I'm a very good nurse today. Mentally, physically, I could teach, So, I mean, I try to be strong, but it's hard. I was writing to the Air Force General website, and the person who responded to my email, she said, I don't know what the problem is. I know what the problem is, my skin's black.
Disregard that you've been here for 30 years. Disregard that you've got family and kids and brought up, and say, nah, from some technical change in immigration legislation, we now deem you to be illegal. We're third-class citizens living in a supposed first-class democracy. That's the fiction of Great Britain right now. It is the colour of your skin that dictates your immigration status, not the circumstances of your birth.
I'm Eulalie Pennant. I was born in 1958. Jamaica was a colony of Britain. Our passport, our birth certificate, everything was from the UK. I always felt close with Britain. My grandfather spent 49 years as a British soldier. He was a Windrush generation. My daughter, my granddaughter is British citizen. I am the only one who is fighting for my status. And I just want to know why.
Changes to our nationality laws that were made as countries gained independence from the British Empire meant that it became much harder to be recognised as people with a valid British identity. And as a result, you're now seeing people being called up for deportation that have been in the UK for decades. And also, the problem at the moment is that deportation is mandatory for anybody that receives a custodial sentence of 12 months or more. So I have clients that arrived in the UK as children, have no links to the country where they were born, and yet the Home Office is trying to deport them.
I'm concerned about being on camera because I don't want it to affect my family. I'm in pain, but not as much as them. I got a call early in the morning. My next door neighbour was saying, they're here to kick off your mum's door. They just came there and locked me up in front of my son. That was the end of everything, really.
Since 2010, Britain has put around 4,400 Jamaicans on deportation flights. But it's not only Jamaica. 225,000 people from countries that were or still are colonised by Britain have been deported in the same period. Those on board are either long-term residents unable to prove their status, now deemed illegal, or foreign-born residents that have served a prison sentence. Matthew was put on a flight to Jamaica in December 2020, having arrived in the UK aged 13. While his mum, partner and 2 kids were in lockdown, he was deported despite having COVID symptoms.
I was burning up. They didn't even come to me and say, take a COVID test or anything. They was like, it's the flu. And then I came here and then they'd done a test. And then they said I got COVID. If I did get a test, I don't think I'd have been on that flight. When I found out I was being deported, I was on the coach going to the plane. My solicitor rang me and said, we're sorry, we couldn't win the case. I was like, Mum's in the UK, I've got my partner, Samantha, and I've got my 2 sons. I don't really want to be here, I don't feel comfortable here.
Have you eaten yet?
Nah, not yet. You know how the eating arrangement is down there.
I know. He came when he was 13. He's British. You've been to school here. Your children are British. Your partner's British. He had his first son. They were both really young, and he was approached by people who basically said they could help with all his problems. Once you get involved in that, it's really hard to walk away. And that's when he went to court and received his sentence and went to prison. The immigration came for him, but that's the last time I've seen him. That really shocked me that they could say, right, you've done this crime out the country.
If they have spent all of their formative years in the UK, they are a product of our society and we need to take responsibility for them. I would say in the majority of cases of deportation, it's for drugs offences. And I would say that in a large number of those cases, it's people that have been trafficked and exploited into drugs possession and drug supply offences, often groomed from a young age.
I take full responsibility. I shouldn't have put myself in what I did, but I got 4 years, 1 month, and I done 2 years, 2 weeks, the intent to supply Class A drugs. Everybody makes mistakes. You have to pay for your consequences, but I've already done my time, and now you're making me pay for it again, even worse.
Even though Matthew lived in Britain from childhood and spent all of his early adult life there, the UK's ruling class no longer recognise him as British because of his prison sentence. And nor do politicians like Tim Loughton accept that crimes committed by people raised in Britain are a result of British society.
In many cases of those people deported to Jamaica, they were serious criminals. If you think coming to Britain is going to make you more vulnerable to becoming a criminal, don't come to Britain. The simple way to avoid being deported because of a criminal activity is don't commit that criminal activity. Simple as that.
If you're an MP and you haven't lived in these men's lives for a day, you can't judge them. You can't sit from your office and judge somebody that has lived in absolute poverty.
And let's face it, black people in this country are racially profiled and disproportionately stopped and searched and criminalised. If you're black and you go in front of a judge, the average sentence for black people is 28 months. The average sentence for white people is 18 months. We've allowed you to stay in our country, but you're black. So the first time you mess up, we're going to deport you.
The media are very quick to typecast Jamaicans in a very negative light. Jamaican migrants to this country came here for a reason. The reason was colonial underdevelopment and poverty in Jamaica. The immense wealth that came to Britain from Jamaica through the sugar companies, through Tate and Lyle, through the finance houses of the City of London, all came on the backs of slaves in plantations in Jamaica. And later on, the elite in this country extracted compensation for the end of the slave trade that was in the billions of pounds at today's value.
Britain owes us a debt. So I'm taking a petition to the Queen. So what she did not do is protect the slaves from the slave owners. One slave owner had the slaves defecate in the mouth of another one. I mean, the kind of brutality, you can't turn a human being into an animal. It can be kicked around, boxed around, do whatever you want, do what you want with them without some compensation.
Under British colonialism, they exterminated indigenous people through overwork, slavery, and disease. They were murderous. They dominated large parts of the world and exploited their wealth and resources and took it to England. Reparations, I think, is a just claim. It's a moral claim, it's a just claim.
The political movement for reparations, or reparatory justice for slavery, is growing across the Caribbean, with some of the greatest academic and political minds drawing up a list of demands to be paid for by the European colonial powers.
The British Empire now has a number of possible options. Full and normal apology, establishment of cultural institutions and return of cultural heritage, education programs to bolster the efforts of the Caribbean region to catch up with the world, having inherited a flawed and inadequate system, debt cancellation and monetary compensation. I'm tired of sitting, having been re-elected for 40-odd years, to hear we have no money for this or we have no money for that. We won't have if we don't claim for what is owed.
If you understand white supremacy and how Europeans have treated non-white peoples, this is just another manifestation of white tyranny and oppression of non-white peoples throughout the world. And so Windrush is just the latest example.
The ancestors of most Jamaicans that were invited to the UK in the 20th century were forcibly taken there from West Africa by Europeans. Estimates say at least 1 million were transported to Jamaica as slaves over a period of 350 years, and 6 million taken to the Caribbean as a whole. Slavery was abolished in 1809, but Britain would remain in control of Jamaica's people and resources until Jamaican independence in 1962. After 300 years of extraction and exploitation by Britain, the country was left poor and underdeveloped, a key driver for the post-war mass migration known as the Windrush.
Windrush is named after the ship, the Empire Windrush, and it was the first organised migration of people from Jamaica to Britain, and it docked in Tilbury. There's pictures of people stepping off this ship, very smartly dressed, women with lovely dresses on, men with suits on, looking forward to a great life in Britain.
When you came to Tilbury, you most probably came up this bridge because this was one of the entry points to go to London. Britain was seen as the motherland. We colonised our country. When people arrived in Britain, they arrived as citizens.
There was no coloured people living there. You would always look in the notice board, rooms to let, no coloured, no Irish, no dogs. One woman, she actually spat in my face. Job situation, it was unheard of to see a coloured man as a motor mechanic, a bus conductor.
My dad's Jamaican, so he came over in 1958. You know, he's always telling of his tales of discrimination that he faced. They found that they were pushed into the least paying jobs, openly discriminatory, apartheid-like housing policies. There was all of this institutional racism as well as dealing with the cruder racism right out there on the streets. But it quickly became organised, whether it was state racism or whether it was organised fascist. People began to self-organise themselves, and that's been a tradition that has lasted from really those early days till today.
From 2001, I came in the UK. My grandfather was in the army for 49 years. Helped to build Britain. Instead of the Home Office trying to regularize my status, I was sent to detention center in 2018 to be deported.
It's a prison. It was definitely a prison. At the age of 60 when I went inside there, I feel like a 60-year-old prisoner. I didn't commit any crime. In the detention center, there were Asians, Jamaicans, Africans. It's like they design a system of hostility, discrimination.
I was in Parliament when Theresa May, as Home Secretary, set this whole thing up. And they set up the idea of a hostile environment by having vans labelled with "Go Home illegal immigrants" parading around the streets. That hostile environment then resulted in police raids deporting British citizens or British residents that had believed they could reside here, did indeed reside here, married, had children, families, family communities and everything else, suddenly taken away.
And tell them that I ain't going anywhere, because they have sent my son back to Jamaica, and 5 months after they sent him home, he was murdered there.
Oh, my God. I was worried for him, because deportation is like all your dignity, all your pride, all your respect is gone. After fighting his case, he was being deported 2008. I don't even know that part, what really happened. They just say he was murdered in his bed. He was just robbed of his chances to be a dad to his children. And it's to me like it was deliberately taken away because I want to say it's because of racism. An institutional racism system. And if it wasn't for that system, my son would be alive today.
I think our detention and deportation systems are a kind of case in point of deep-rooted, institutionalised racism in Britain. We have, at my organisation, looked at nationality statistics for detention, and what's really clear from those is that if you are from a predominantly black country, say Jamaica or Nigeria, you're much more likely to be detained than if you are from a predominantly white country like Australia, for example, or New Zealand.
I'm a strong campaigner of the Windrush generations. I always try to see other people who are in the same position as I was in, to help them. I've got a cousin by the name of Ben. He was deported. He's got 3 children still here. His sister Karen, his nieces, nephews.
I don't know what really took place in my situation. I just know that I went to prison, do my time, and I went to one detention center and back to Jamaica. So when I came back, was always early abuse, deportee, a waste of time, etc. Everybody's in poverty then. They can't get a job, they don't get no support. But day to day, I'm alright, trying to get around, doing something to survive, but still missing a part of family unit.
Do you think deportation and removal should be all scrapped?
I don't think they should have that. I don't think so. The removal is not punishing him, just him. It's punishing the family who is left back here. So I think they should actually consider who is left behind. So we're doing time as well.
Even his daughter is doing time.
Yeah.
Hi, Dad. He always used to get McDonald's and feed me like lots of different types of breads. And then that's why I put on a lot of weight. Just used to stuff my face full. Yeah.
They got the proof to show that I'm in the little girl life, my daughter life. They still don't want to accept it. For a very special dad from my daughter. Just looking back on these words just kind of just make it feel heartbroken. I'm not there at the minute.
They should be fighting his case.
When racist immigration system trying to ruin your lives, you have to stand up and fight back. I am not gonna let the same thing that happened to my son happen to me. So I stand up and I fight back. I stand up and I fight back.
Dane and Matthew are still fighting to come home. And while Eulalie and Sharon were both given temporary residency, they are still liable to be deported once this expires. But the fact remains that large numbers of the Windrush generation and later migrants would not have left their home if it wasn't for centuries of colonialism that left the Caribbean poor and underdeveloped. While the elites then built grand buildings and factories to store the goods of empire, the elites of today deny that the exploitation and plunder has impacted present-day Jamaica.
We have historic ties with Jamaica. That doesn't mean that we should now become responsible for some of the social ills happening back in Kingston. We don't owe a duty of care to the rest of the world, whether or not they've been former colonies or not.
The colonizers are actually psychopaths now. If you look at what they did and how the descendants of the oppressors, how they justify what happened in the past, and the fact that David Cameron could come in our parliament to tell us that we should forget about slavery. It was rude and out of order.
I think David Cameron was entirely wrong not to apologise for the slave trade. I think it's time we just recognise that our living standards, our wealth, our health comes from sugar money from Jamaica, and recognise the work of Jamaicans and others that have made their lives here.
I remember life before there was big numbers of black communities, and the splash of life, dynamism and colour that black people's culture brought to the country. These are the people who brought a cultural revolution to the country, didn't they? Carnival, Jamaican reggae music and ska.
Lover, freedom fighter, freedom chanter.
Most of my songs, they sound so deeply, because I wrote them off experience, because everything in my life, from I was a small girl until now, it's a struggle. Life is about struggling, fighting for humanity, fighting for solidarity, fighting to feel like you are being wanted, fighting to feel like you are somebody, you are a human. Whether music, or my dignity, or my pride, nothing at all can stand in my way.